first question is from Pete on going in and out of ketosis. Hey Rob, I've been on and off a keto diet for the past 5 years or so, and when in ketosis, I feel fantastic. I train Muay Thai, and on days that I train, I tend to up my carb intake as I just feel better throughout training, similar to you with jiu-jitsu. On Sundays, however, I do tend to go off the rails a bit and find myself on Monday down around the 0.2 millimolar per liter level, and then by Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, back up to anywhere between 1.0 to 2.4 millimolars per liter, where I stay for the rest of the week. I have in the past gone several months at a time on a 30 to 50 gram carb per day diet on multiple occasions. Haven't done so in the past year and a half or so. I've been hearing a lot lately that this quick fluctuation between low carb to moderate high carb intake can be very bad for you. Can you help shed some light on this? Am I doing long-term damage to my body by fluctuating?
It's a really good question. Like there have been some studies recently. Bill Lagakos posted a few of these where people on a ketogenic diet, and you know, I can't remember if it was actually a human study or animal study. I'll have to dig around on that. But basically, they had a keto-adapted organism, either human or rodent, given some carbs. Blood glucose levels went quite high you would anticipate some like damage to the vascular endothelium. And so the thought there was low carb diets are dangerous because when people deviate off the low carb diet, then, there's problems. And we definitely know that in the low carb state, people become physiologically insulin resistant or have a tendency to become physiologically insulin resistant, which what that means is in general, the muscles and the adipose tissue don't really take up as much glucose as what they did previously. And that the glucose is being spared for the brain and the red blood cells and the tissues that really have to have glucose. But in the context of something like this, like the way that Tyler and Luis have recommended for like keto gains and whatnot, a low glycemic load titration up in carbohydrates seems to be totally benign. Doing the targeted approach in which you're putting 10, 15 grams of glucose into the mix immediately pre-training, we really don't have good studies on that, but I can't imagine that is a net negative, particularly when I see how well people perform on that and they feel good.
Does it have more to do with how his blood glucose is responding when he jumps to high carb, or is it because it seems like with the metabolic flexibility stuff, one who is metabolically flexible should be able to go from
you should.
Other,
the thing is we're only seeing blood ketone levels here. We're not really seeing his blood glucose levels.
My question is what he's at. Is this deviation that he's saying that could be dangerous? Is that if the person's blood glucose levels?
Yes, that's where the concern is, and we just don't have enough information here to really know what's going on. This is one of those tough things though, where is going on a complete hookers and cocaine carb binge while keto adapted a bad thing? Yeah. Is going on a complete hookers and cocaine carb binge a bad thing while eating whatever? Yeah. And this is one of the things that I think is quite frustrating, and the vegans, as I'm calling them now, they will cite these studies where you eat a high-fat diet and you get disruption in vascular endothelial function. Any meal causes a disruption in vascular endothelial function. This is why we shouldn't fucking graze all day, and we should eat a meal here, a meal there, and then have periods of time where we're not putting calories into our system, because every time you eat, there's a systemic inflammatory response. You get a little bit of lipopolysaccharide that goes through the gut barrier into systemic circulation.
Plants.
Of course, if you're not eating plants. I'm tired enough right now that Nikki nearly got like a spinning elbow off of that one. So yeah, of course, plants only don't cause any of these problems, but this is where it, and this is something actually, now that I'm thinking about it, it would be worthwhile to look at what's the disruption in endothelial function when somebody's low carb and eats a carb-rich meal versus just Joe Schmo is motoring along, and then they eat a carb and or a fat-rich meal and see what the vascular endothelial dysfunction is in that scenario. This stuff, again, also, it boils down to, are you overeating, both in amount and frequency? This is some stuff that's also really interesting, where they took people who were caloric restricted and relatively few meals, like 2 or 3, or calorie restricted and like 6 or 8 meals a day. And the calorie restricted plus 6 or 8 meals per day had no real benefit with regards to systemic inflammatory function and like a bunch of other biomarkers of like aging and inflammation. So eating too frequently is a problem, even when we add in calorie restriction, so you can completely undo that. So, man, I don't know, like it makes a case for just not being an asshole with your food. Like, if you're kind of eating low carb, kind of stick with low carb. And particularly in this day and age, if you want some ice cream, get like some Mammoth Creamery or like some Killer Way low carb ice cream. If you want some cookies, get some Nui cookies or something. Like, if you're generally eating low carb, then generally figure out a fucking way to eat low carb. If you're not, then kind of work within that. But I do think that it's a really good question. Pete raises a great question, and I don't think we have remotely like all the answers on this. There's a lot of moving parts to it, but there is just kind of a reality. If we don't overeat, if we're not eating at a ridiculous meal frequency, which ironically 2 or 3 meals per day seems to be a reasonable meal frequency, you're getting enough evil mTOR activation that you don't totally wither away all your muscle mass and die from sarcopenia, but you also are not eating so frequently that we're getting a real legit upregulation in systemic inflammatory signaling and whatnot. So, again, Pete, I don't know if I really answered your question there, but there's a lot going on with this.
And also, like, how far off the rails are you going? Like, are you doing like 800 grams of carbs, or are you doing 200? I think that can play into it too.
And if it's post-workout or something, it's a really different story versus, our weeks tend to be a little bit more sedentary on the front end. We're not even really making it to formal jiu-jitsu class on Tuesday, Thursdays right now because of workload. We're lucky if we go out in the garage and do a little bit of drilling. So like on the front end of the week, I'm not really eating much in the way of carbs, whereas like Friday, Saturday, those tend to be bigger training days. And so like I'll have a couple of oranges for breakfast, and then in addition to all my other stuff, and then we'll do jiu-jitsu. And then based off of how knackered I am from that jiu-jitsu training session, I may do, so the 2 oranges are like 40 grams of carbs alone. And then after that, I may have the equivalent of like 3 or 4 more oranges. So I end up, that 100 to 120 grams per day of carbohydrate, but I feel good with that. I don't get a crazy blood sugar crash. I'm not tracking ketones, but I just kind of dose it appropriate to my activity level. Whereas if I'm just sitting working, I don't need it. Like, I just don't need it. I don't need that many calories. I don't need that many carbs. And so I just don't throw it in. So to your point, there's a lot of mitigating strategies that can be employed, like exercise and the meal timing and stuff like that.
Okay.